This young warrior had his people defeated and humiliated by an insanely stronger empire. Meanwhile, our protagonist woke up somewhere else, asking a god and an angel if he was dead. The god explains that he actually survived a traffic accident. The problem is that the angel brought him to the afterlife while he was still alive, purely out of carelessness. The deity laments that he passed away so young and a virgin, but our guy immediately cuts him off, saying that wasn't true. Seeing the confusion, the god offers to send him back, since it was all just a misunderstanding. The problem is that while they were talking, his body had already been cremated, which sent him into a complete panic. The angel nervously asks him to calm down, but the poor guy explodes, saying it's entirely their fault, questioning how they could be so careless. The god then interrupts him, saying he heard the case and that for these situations they have an emergency solution. He explains that since he can't return to his world, the only option is to reincarnate him into another. The condition, however, is terrifying. There's no guarantee of a safe birth. He'll have to take over the body of someone who just died. But the god insists that since the mistake was theirs, it's a divine responsibility to preserve his life, and apologizes for the confusion. Thinking for a moment, his life wasn't much to brag about, and he was surprised to learn he even had a funeral. The idea of a new chance starts to seem tempting. He then accepts the proposal, to the god's delight. With everything settled, our guy asks the most important question: what abilities will he receive in this new life? That's when the angel gets excited, offering to be his guide and saying she always wanted to try something like this. With a gleam in her eyes, she starts listing the powers: a body of steel, language abilities, and knowledge comparable to a modern smartphone. But suddenly, a strange sound echoes through the place. The god hears a bell and announces that his shift is over, leaving him in a panic as he asks about his reincarnation. Out of time, the god says that the angel, Chochoi, will choose the special abilities for him. The god and the angel say goodbye, sending him off to his new destination. And so, his second life begins. He wakes up in a bed covered in bandages and injuries in the body of the young warrior from the beginning of the story. A man with a mustache approaches, calling him Gaia. Confused, he wonders if that's his new name. But before he could think, an absurd pain hit his body, and a flood of information about that world inundates his mind. He curses the god for not having explained any of this earlier. The pain finally subsides, and he manages to focus. The new memories settle in, and he recognizes the man in front of him as his uncle, Atos. Relieved, the uncle hugs him tightly and cries, thanking the heavens that Gaia is alive. Amidst the hug, Atos reveals tragic news. Gaia's brother and sister are gone, and he couldn't bear to lose anyone else. Only then does our hero look at his hands and understand everything. The god was literal. He really took over the body of someone who just died, inheriting all their pain. But he quickly feels a pang of guilt, wondering if it's right to take the body of someone so dear to his family. Atos, drying his tears, asks if he's okay, worried about the wounds the Empire's soldiers inflicted on him. That's when Gaia looked at his own arm and felt a strange energy flow through his body. He is startled, feeling the wounds closing on their own, and he soon realizes what's happening. It was one of that god's abilities. To reassure his uncle, he rips off one of the bandages and says he's fine, ensuring the injuries weren't that bad. Atos, now serious, says he knows he just woke up, but they need to go somewhere urgently. As they walk, the memories of the real Gaia confirm the situation. He is the next in line of succession for the Bluemont tribe, which is fighting against the tyranny of the Vaffencrow Empire. Thus, they arrive at a camp, where other men await them. One of them thanks Atos for having contacted the Emperor. Atos then announces with wounded pride that he and Gaia will demand an apology for the Empire's misconduct. Gaia understands the plan. His uncle was humiliating himself in hopes of securing a deal with the Emperor. The memory was clear. When the Bluemonts rebelled against the Empire's tyranny, they lost. And now, they were at the mercy of Emperor Gordius III. Atos throws himself on the ground, begging for mercy and blaming the rebellion entirely on the former chief Noel, Gaia's father. Suddenly, one of the guards tells the boy to lift his head. But before he can react, a violent kick hits his face. This is the Emperor's son, who calls him arrogant and inferior to an animal for daring to ask for mercy. Atos tries to intervene, asking the prince to stop, but is shoved away like an insect. Seeing this, a flame of hatred ignites in Gaia's heart. It is then that the emperor tells his son, Muno, to stop. He addresses the two, saying their rebellion cannot be forgiven, as it disrupted the empire's peace. But, as he heard that the Brahmin tribe is made up of great warriors, he offers a deal. They must swear to dedicate their lives to the empire. Atos bows his head to the ground, thanking the emperor for his pity. A guard watches them with a sadistic smile, telling them to serve well and know their place. Outside, the humiliation still burns. Atos apologizes to Gaia for turning his parents into villains to save the tribe. Suddenly, Gaia's mind is flooded with flashes of the war, of his people chained while imperial soldiers were slaughtered. He remembers the battlefield, his father dying, and himself fallen with arrows in his body holding a flower. An old memory rushes back. As a child, he asks his father why the Empire's people call them barbarians. His father explains that it's simple ignorance. Since they don't understand their language, everything they, the elves, or the lizard men say sounds wrong. Little Gaia finds it ridiculous. His father laughs, agreeing that they're just fools for not trying to understand, and says that the barbarian people are just as good as the Empire, and that's why they should always be proud of who they are. His father said that one day they would free themselves from the Empire and build a land for their own people. Well, that memory brought tears to Gaia's eyes. His uncle is startled to see him cry. He asks if the boy is hurt, but Gaia denies it, trying to hide the avalanche of emotions he was feeling. But the anger was too strong. He explodes, questioning why his parents and his people had to die just for being called barbarians. In his past life, he had never cared so much about anything. He wonders if that feeling belonged to the original Gaia, but soon realizes it doesn't. That fury was his. And with that certainty, he declares to himself, he would never forgive the Empire. Seeing his attitude, Atos says they need to become stronger. Later, in a meeting with the tribe elders, the tension was clear. One of them questions Atos for trying to name Gaia as chief, but he doesn't back down, stating it's the best decision. The other men protest, saying he is too young and that Atos himself would be a better choice. But the uncle insists, asking everyone to help him assume his new role. Seeing the conviction in his words, one of the elders gives in, saying he will trust his judgment. Alone, Gaia questions him, asking if he's sure he made the right choice. Atos asks if he's not confident, which leaves the boy unsure how to respond. But he soon admits that, having never done something like this before, he can't feel confident. And Atos laughs at his nephew's honesty. Then, he says that Gaia's father, his brother, was a brave man. He remembers how Noel spoke of his people's future with passion, and how he wanted to fight by his side. Atos admits that Gaia is different from his father and is still young, but asks for forgiveness for placing all his hopes on him. With an open heart, he asks Gaia to let him believe in his potential. Outside the chambers, poor Gaia feels lost. He concludes that reckless god threw him into a real nightmare, but he knows he can't back down. If there are people who believe in him, he will do whatever it takes to meet their expectations. Gaia vows that he will overthrow the Empire. They can call him a barbarian, for he will wear the title as a badge of honor. Back in his village, he decides to test one of his new abilities. He concentrates and invokes the Smarfan. The mysterious object appears in his hands, one of the abilities that God gave him as an apology. He finds the name ridiculous, but the function is incredible. According to the god's revelation, it is a high-level information terminal with detailed maps and data on plants, animals, and resources. An absurd ability for that world. He discovers there's even a people category and finds his uncle's profile. Suddenly, Atos himself appears, asking if he needs anything, and asks for help to fix the wall the Imperials destroyed. It is then that he realizes only he can see the Smarfan. To others, he was just standing still staring into space, and because of this, he makes a mental note to be more careful not to look crazy. While they work, one of the men comments to Atos that progress is good and soon everything will return to normal. But the conversation changes to a darker tone because the warehouse was destroyed and soon the people would lack wheat. The conversation was just one thing: they needed money. The Bluemont tribe lived in the forest with little land to farm. Hunting helped, but it wasn't enough to supply everything. And to buy what was missing, they needed cash. The problem is that the good land for planting belonged to the Empire, and to negotiate with them, they needed their currency. Gaia quickly realizes the irony. To overthrow the Empire, he first needed to depend on it. The only way out was to find something to sell. That's when he has an idea and checks his map, and something catches his attention. The map indicated an ore vein very close to the village. It was salt, rock salt, and the realization hits him instantly, remembering that salt is a type of mineral. With a smile, he discovers that the entire area was once an ocean. Luck seemed to be on his side. He immediately thinks they could sell that. Salt is an expensive and essential item, always in high demand. If the deposit was stable, it could become the tribe's main source of income. Thus, he decides to go to the location to investigate. But upon arriving there, he understands why no one ever found it. A gigantic and furious bear guarded the place. His Smarfan identifies the creature as a blood bear, with a danger level that didn't seem that high. With no choice, he draws his sword and charges at the beast. But the blow doesn't even tickle. The sword breaks on the animal's hide, which retaliates with a violent swipe. Back in the village, Atos is shocked to hear where he went, saying he was lucky to get out unscathed. But he knew he was only alive thanks to his healing ability, a secret he couldn't reveal. The others confirm the legend. That bear's hide is so tough that no sword can pierce it. He realizes, frustrated, that he will have to give up on the rock salt for now. His uncle then asks the reason for going to such a dangerous place. He explains that he heard the conversation about money and wanted to find something that could help the tribe. One of the men comments that there are many parts of the forest they avoid for safety. That's when Gaia admitted that as chief, he felt like just a figurehead and therefore wanted to do something useful for his people. Everyone is shocked. The old Gaia only cared about training. The boy's change in attitude moves them. Putting that aside, the woman jokes that Atos is the master of negotiation when it comes to money, and Atos reveals that they already have an industry of their own. Gaia doesn't understand what he's talking about. That's when his uncle took him to see. Their industry was simple and brutal. Mercenary work. There they prepare for battle, and the enemy this time was the kingdom of Algiers, but the contractor was the empire itself. Gaia watches this and doesn't understand the excitement. After all, they were heading to war. But Atos explains that, for the tribe, battle is the time to earn money. Suddenly, one of the warriors announces that a delivery has arrived for Atos. It was a huge box full of brand new weapons. Gaia is shocked, asking his uncle where the money came from to buy all that. But Atos reveals he didn't spend anything. He simply made the contractor supply the equipment. And that wasn't all. The Empire would also provide food and even gave an advance payment. Gaia could barely believe his uncle's skill. He admits he expected to be treated as cannon fodder, not to receive fair payment. But Atos explains the situation. Emperor Gordius loves war and is always in conflict, so he constantly lacks good soldiers. He concludes that as a tribe, they lost, but as mercenaries, the Empire needs them. and that gives them bargaining power. One of the men then tells him to pick up a new weapon since his was damaged. As he chooses, his companions tease him for having faced the blood bear. He quickly grabs a sword that catches his attention, and the man praises his choice. But upon examining it closely, he feels something is wrong. That's when he realizes the weapons they use are copper, or rather, bronze. Bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was easy to forge and resistant to rust, a useful and easy-to-handle metal. But as a weapon, it was far inferior to iron, a material that revolutionized warfare. He remembers the Imperial soldiers' equipment and realizes that iron already exists and is commercially traded. The problem wasn't a lack of supply, but rather a lack of demand on their part. In other words, iron was simply too expensive for his tribe. Now everything made sense. The blade failing to pierce the bear's hide wasn't due to a lack of strength, but a problem with the weapon. He wonders if with money, they could finally buy iron weapons. But his thoughts are interrupted by Atos, who has a suggestion for the upcoming war. He explains that the conflict is bigger than they thought, and they will need the help of neighboring tribes. And so, an army of various races gathers, including humans, elves, and even lizardmen. Atos comments that it's been a long time since he saw so many gathered. Gaia, however, understands the reason. Everyone wants money. Since the Bluemont tribe is leading, Atos says Gaia, as chief, must greet everyone. He starts interacting with the other warriors, trying to blend in. That's when he sees a stunningly beautiful elven archer. He is paralyzed, completely mesmerized by her. She then says something, but to Gaia's surprise, the words sound like an incomprehensible noise. His language abilities seem to have a severe flaw. That's when he remembered the ability the god gave him. Suddenly, a terrible headache hits him. The elven language was being installed in his brain. The god promised he wouldn't have problems with languages. As an image of the god appears in his mind, telling him to just hold on, the elf, worried, asks if he's okay. That's when he apologized, saying he was fine. The girl is shocked, not understanding how he could suddenly speak her language. But the conversation is interrupted by a lizardman warrior looking for Gaia. He introduces himself as Rosso, the chief of the Great Lizard Tribe, and says he came to greet the mission commander. He wanted to meet the famous Gaia, the new chief of the Bluemonts. Our hero introduces himself and welcomes the allied tribe. Rosso greets him, shaking his hand, but soon provokes him, saying he is too small for a Bluemont and wouldn't be worth eating. That's when the giant lizard bursts into laughter, saying it was just a joke. The elf, however, rolls her eyes, finding the conversation between the two completely stupid. Rosso says that elves don't speak the barbarian tongue and don't negotiate with other tribes, making it impossible to know what they think. The provocation, however, doesn't go unnoticed. She introduces herself as Jessica and retorts, saying it's not that they don't know how to speak the language, they simply don't want to. To her, the elven language is more beautiful. Rosso, confused by the arrogance, tells her to stop being pretentious. Seeing this, our guy quickly realized the difficult personalities he would have to lead. Despite the tensions, an unlikely alliance had been formed. It is then that Atos calls him, announcing that it's time to leave. The warriors tease him, telling the new chief not to get tired as the journey would be long. And so, they march to the battlefield. That would be his first campaign. Hours later, they arrive at the Pyros Plain in the kingdom of Algiers, a vast land disputed between the two countries. But instead of fields of wheat, what they saw was a forest of spears from the Imperial army. A commander addresses the troops, declaring that the goal is to take the plain and restore it to the Empire. That territory would serve as a starting point to demonstrate the Empire's power to the neighboring kingdom. The soldiers shout in euphoria, celebrating the glory of their emperor. For Gaia, the emperor was the target of his revenge, but there he saw a high-caliber leader, which made him even angrier. He hears that Prince Munot is in command of the battle, while a general gives the final orders, dismissing the troops. The Imperial soldiers stare at them with contempt, surprised to see barbarians who could speak their language. They scoff, certain that the mercenaries don't understand anything, little knowing that Gaia heard every word. Then, the army general approaches. He says he heard their fighting style is different, and therefore, there's no place for them in his formations, asking them to provide support on the flanks. The order was polite, but the message was clear, and Gaia understands immediately. The general basically told him to stay out of the way so as not to interfere. His companions mock the Empire's tactic, slow as turtles with their enormous shields, but Gaia remembers that, even so, they lost. Rosso explains that the lack of coordination is a problem, as some tribes don't understand the Imperial language and wouldn't be able to follow orders. His men laugh, joking that if something goes wrong, they might end up fighting among themselves, ignoring the enemy. One of the warriors tells him not to worry, as the tribe's honor is to fight and die bravely, like wolves. Gaia, however, couldn't agree. He remembers that it was exactly that mentality that led his parents to death. He quickly feels the difference in values shaped by his past life in an era of peace. And to him, it was obvious that the best thing was for fewer people to die. But he knows he is on a battlefield and he will have no mercy on his enemies. His plan was twofold: minimize the deaths of the barbarians and find a way to earn more money. After all, that's what they were there for. He admits to himself that the plan might be too ambitious, but while planning, something on his smartphone catches his attention. Suddenly, an explosion occurs at the Algiers Kingdom camp. The Kingdom's soldiers panic, confused, as one of them yells that it was the mages from the mercenary camp. But the attack came from a single person, Jessica, The elf. The soldiers don't understand anything, wondering why the crazy girl attacked out of nowhere, concluding she must not be very intelligent. She approaches one of them clearly nervous and demands an apology. She screams that they were wrong about elves and slavery, but the soldiers scoff, wondering why she is so upset about it. They say that in the Empire, everyone of her race is a slave, and they just wanted the beauty to play with them a bit. That's when Gaia appears, telling the bastards to stop. The soldiers call him a barbarian and ask if he's the girl's lover. To him, the prejudice was clear. They saw them only as animals. Tired of the nonsense, he formally introduces himself as Gaia, a barbarian mercenary from the Bluemont tribe. Jessica is surprised to realize he speaks the Imperial language. He says he apologizes for his allies' attitude, but won't listen to their insults. He draws his sword, saying they came to the battlefield as soldiers, and if they can only see them as barbarians. Then he will respond with barbarian courtesy, leaving the threat hanging in the air. The soldier is furious at the mercenary's audacity, but the Empire's general arrives, telling the soldiers to stop causing trouble. Irritated, he sends his men back to the formation and dismisses the mercenaries, telling them to return to their posts immediately. Jessica turns to Gaia, and just as she was about to say something, he interrupts her, holding her hand tightly, and gets straight to the point, asking if the explosion earlier was her doing. And without giving her time to answer, he asks if elves can use magic. Confused by the approach, she confirms that they can. He gets excited and she explains that it's not an exclusive elven ability, and that the Empire also has its own magical soldiers. But he doesn't stop there. He fires question after question. How many users are there? What is the range? Are there limits to the spells? Unsure how to respond, she says that perhaps her uncle, the tribe's chief, knows the details. Without wasting time, Gaia drags her away, telling her to ask him. Thus, they arrive at the tent of the elven chief Elenif, who wants to know what the barbarian wants with his magical soldiers. The chief is suspicious of his intentions, saying that the way they fight is none of his business. But Gaia is direct and gets straight to the point. He asks for the elves' cooperation in the battle to come. He admits he doesn't have a detailed strategy, but has an idea that needs their strength. He explains that if the plan works, not only his tribe, but the elves will also benefit. The chief, who already knew about the previous fight, tells him to explain his idea, and he was impressed that Gaia spoke his language and called them comrades. Gaia asks if they agree to cooperate, but the elf makes it clear that, as mercenaries, everything depends on the terms. With a confident smile, he assures them that they won't lose out, and the elven chief accepts the proposal, saying he will be anxious to see the result. With the alliance formed, our hero says goodbye with a nod, leaving Jessica somewhat confused. Meanwhile, on the Pyros plain, the great Empire's army prepares for battle, in the name of its justice. A general addresses his loyal warriors, asking for the protection of the god of war, and with a deafening shout, he orders the advance. The wall of shields moves, while the enemy commander orders his archers to attack. The Empire responds with its own archers and a magical barrier to protect against the rain of arrows. The first explosion marks the start of the war, and Rosso howls, shouting for them to charge with everything. The other tribes follow him, shouting, "It's time to make money." Excitement takes over the mercenaries. But not everyone advances. Atos and a few others stay behind, showing the lack of coordination between the tribes. That's when the old man shifts his gaze to Gaia, awaiting the decision of his new chief. He takes a deep breath, and with the smartphone in hand, he shouts to his tribe, "It's time to go, guys." The Empire's soldiers don't understand anything, wondering where the hell they were going. One of them shouts, furious, that the enemy is not in that direction, accusing them of not understanding anything about war. Rosso, with contempt, merely comments that this is why they are called barbarians. Even his own men question the decision, saying he is moving away from the battlefield. But to everyone's surprise, the elves also follow him, trusting the boy's plan. He assures them it's fine, explaining that if they flank from that side, they will get close to the enemy, and reveals his true objective. They will take out the enemy army commander's head first. The audacity of the plan leaves his companions completely speechless. They ask how he knows where the commander is, and he explains that he can simply sense it, as if he had the eye of a god on his side. Meanwhile, far away, the king of the kingdom of Algius relaxes, surrounded by his nobles, confident of victory. His advisors flatter him, saying that victory is guaranteed thanks to their brave warriors. The king laughs, agreeing with the flattery, completely oblivious to the danger approaching. He drinks his wine, underestimating the power of the Empire, and especially the unpredictability of its new mercenaries. Back on the field, Gaia leads his small troop through the forest, racing against time. He explains that although they don't have the numbers, they have a secret weapon, the real-time information from his smartphone. With the map, he knows the commander's exact position, allowing them to bypass the main force and attack where they least expect it. The plan is a surprise attack followed by a quick retreat, since, as foot soldiers, they wouldn't stand a chance against the enemy cavalry. He then reminds them of their honor, to fight bravely like wolves, using the tribe's own pride to motivate them. But Atos, despite his fear, trusts his nephew, and remembers the conversation they had, him explaining that if the commander falls, the enemy chain of command will collapse. Thus, the war would end faster, and they could reduce the number of dead and wounded. To him, it was worth a try. With the plan outlined, the group advanced united, following their new and unpredictable chief. Atos declares that he will follow him, as he has already decided to trust Gaia, silencing those who still doubted. Inspired by the courage, the other warriors get excited, saying that if they are going to do it, they should do it with everything. Meanwhile, on the front line, the dark magic of the Algius army advances on the Imperial troops. The Empire's knights complain about the noise and flashes of magic. They know magic is powerful, but with their mages' barriers, they feel safe. The general reflects that only the magical soldiers can create the barriers, and that a direct hit would be devastating, but unlikely. Suddenly, a soldier approaches the general, wanting to know the situation on the front line. The soldier reports that the battle is balanced, with the forces on both sides being practically equal. One of the officers suggests sending in the cavalry, but the other refuses, saying the enemy would simply counterattack. The general concludes that the battle will drag on, but admits he never expected it to end in a single day. He then asks if there is anything else unusual to report, and the soldier informs that a unit of barbarian mercenaries on the right flank broke formation and fled into the forest. The general is surprised by the news, and immediately bursts into laughter, saying that the so-called bravery of the barbarians was nothing more than a rumor. Suddenly, an explosion in the distance catches everyone's attention. The general quickly connects the dots and, urgently, demands to know which direction the mercenaries went, which leaves his subordinates somewhat surprised. Meanwhile, in the forest, Gaia and his group advance non-stop. Atos turns to his nephew, praising his ability to get the elves' cooperation for the operation. That's when Rosso appears, to Gaia's surprise, who didn't know the lizard tribe was involved. The lizard explains that, seeing the group heading in a strange direction, he imagined something was happening and decided to join them. Thus, they reach a clearing overlooking the enemy city. They crouch down, ready for the ambush. And using a smartphone, Gaia points out the commander's exact location. One of the warriors comments on the difficulty of fighting mounted enemies, but Gaia reveals the first part of the plan. The elves will use magic to break their formation. His companions are skeptical, wondering if the magic could really hit them. Jessica explains that if the magic hits the barrier, it will be a waste, and suggests using bows. But Gaia insists, asking her to aim exactly where he tells her. With the target in mind, he points, showing the gap in the barrier. And so, the surprise attack begins, catching the cavalry completely off guard. Soon an explosion of dark magic hits the middle of the formation, causing chaos. One of them tries to calm down, saying it was just a lucky shot. But the chaos only increases when another spell hits the squadron. One of Gaia's warriors yells, shocked, asking if they really hit. Jessica is speechless, unable to believe he hit the bullseye twice in a row. She wonders how he managed to aim with such precision from that distance. To her, it was as if he could see the barrier. With the path open, Gaia declares that the target is the commander's neck. He then shouts for his squadron to advance, leading the charge with everything they have. Amidst the chaos, one of the knights tries to calm his men, telling them not to fear, because according to him, they were just infantry soldiers. While Rosso enjoys the slaughter, Ados shouts for everyone to keep advancing. Gaia ignores the soldiers, looking for his true target. He soon sees the commander trying to retreat, and with a smile, intercepts him before he can flee. The commander, surprised by the audacity, barely has time to react to the surprise attack, but the guards protect him. That's when Rosso arrives to help, and Gaia introduces himself, declaring that he will take off the general's head. But the range difference was a problem. Gaia realizes that from that distance he wouldn't be able to reach him with his sword. With no other choice, he runs straight into the knight's spear. While impaling him, the commander calls him a fool for charging without thinking, saying his sword would never reach him. But we all know Gaia possesses absurd regeneration, and with his dagger in hand, he says he's sorry, because the only one who would die there was him. Rosso runs up to him, worried, asking if he's okay. That's when Gaia disguises his ability, saying that if he didn't die, it's because it wasn't his time. They look at the body, confirming the commander's death. The plan had worked. Rosso then announces to everyone that Gaia, of the barbarian mercenaries, killed General Pausania of the Kingdom of Algius. His companions can't believe what they heard, and Jessica, shocked, admits that it's unbelievable he actually pulled it off. The enemy knights, furious at the humiliation of being defeated by infantry, wonder how they will face the prince after that defeat. Completely enraged, one of them orders them not to let Gaia escape alive, telling them to kill them all. Atos shouts for everyone to retreat to the forest as they were being surrounded. The enemy cavalry's counterattack was devastating, but suddenly, the Empire's cavalry arrives, saving the mercenaries at the last second. The general praises their efforts, and with a smile tells them to make sure the reward is generous. And so, Gaia's first battle comes to an end. Right after the victory, the mercenaries collect the spoils of war. They celebrate, happy to finally be able to take the weapons of the Algius soldiers. Atos says he doesn't mind. After all, no treasure can be taken to the land of the dead. And so, the Battle of Pyros Plain was decided in a single day. Without its commander, the Algius army lost all order and was completely annihilated by the Empire's advance. And as is the custom of war in that land, the right to the spoils belongs to the one who brings down the prey. Even the general of the Imperial army was fair in the distribution, ensuring they received the equipment of the enemy soldiers. Gaia, with a feeling of guilt, prays for the weapon's former owner, but admits he's extremely grateful. Atos then picks up one of the swords, praising the quality of the kingdom's soldier's weapon, and shows it to his nephew, saying it was made of iron. Gaia, shocked, concludes that the kingdom's army uses high-quality equipment. He explains that although the Imperial soldiers also use it, iron weapons are expensive and rare in the market. The purchase price is high, but so is the selling price. His uncle says that besides being a practical tool, in a pinch, They could sell the weapons, and now they had plenty of them. While Gaia admires his new sword, his companions joke that Atos seems happy. He then remembers the blood bear and realizes that with an iron sword, perhaps now he would have a chance against the beast. With that, Gaia decides he will try to get the rock salt again when they return. That's when Rosso approaches, also with a new sword in hand. Gaia, excited, shows him his and says that now they also have iron weapons. But the lizard just stares at the weapon with an expression of disdain. And to Gaia's shock, he simply throws the iron sword away. Our hero explodes, asking why the hell he did that. Rosso, confused, doesn't understand the reason for the scandal. He then picks up his old bronze sword and says that this one is shinier and prettier, which leaves Gaia completely speechless. The poor guy tries to explain the waste, but Rosso retorts saying that iron ones rust and fall apart too quickly. To him, iron weapons are boring and he prefers something that stands out on the battlefield. With that, Gaia finally gives up on trying to talk sense into him. Suddenly, one of the elves approaches and informs that they also received horses as part of the reward. Gaia and Rosso look at the animals, and to the poor guy's despair, the first thing Rosso says is that they look tasty and asks if they can't eat them. That's when Jessica appears and tells Gaia to go wash himself as he was covered in blood. He then walks away, heading toward a nearby stream. On the way, he overhears other lizard men talking, and they all agree that the shiniest weapons are the best. He can't believe they were throwing away iron weapons. He understands that people cling to what they know, but still, it was a huge waste. That's when he looks at himself and realizes that his wounds are all closed up, which was quite strange. He remembers the battle and how he felt that the original Gaia's memories guided his body. He reflects on how he ran straight into his enemy's spear and concludes that it's no wonder the old Gaia died fighting that way. But now he knows he wouldn't die anymore from a wound like that. A gift from the gods or not, he had become practically a monster. But to him, it didn't matter. As long as he could prove the Empire wrong, he didn't care what he would become. Upon reaching the stream, he realizes someone is already in the water. He politely asks who is there, and to his surprise, it was Jessica. He is completely paralyzed. The elf turns around, surprised, and without showing shame, asks if he also came to wash and warns him to be careful, as the water is cold. Unsure how to react, he throws himself on the ground. She is confused, and he explains that this is an apology pose for accidentally spying on a woman bathing. He says he will leave immediately and asks for forgiveness, but the elf, confused, says she isn't even angry. Gaia asks where her clothes are. That's when she explodes, saying she's not angry, but he shouts that she needs to cover up. A little later, they are both dressed, but the atmosphere is still awkward. He turns to her, unsure what to say, and is soon astonished by the tense atmosphere she was emanating. That's when she notices a scar on his back. She asks if he got hurt, which he confirms. Jessica asks why he follows the Empire, even hurting himself like that. He tries to explain that he isn't exactly following the Empire, but she cuts him off, saying she heard that his parents, the former tribal chiefs, were killed by them, and asks how he can follow the Empire so calmly. The question hits him hard. He explodes, screaming that it's obvious he's not okay with it, but soon apologizes for losing his temper. She then says that all the other elves just accepted it, and confides, saying that her companions were taken, her father was killed, and so was her mother. With tears in her eyes, she admits she feels frustrated. He, not knowing what to say, apologizes and sinks back into the stream. A little later, the tribe prepares to leave. One of the warriors complains that the Imperial army exploits them, sending them to the next battle without rest. One of them warns them not to forget anything. Atos explains that the previous battle was a simultaneous attack with another front, and that they should go as reinforcements. He suspects that the other front is actually the main battlefield. Their next destination is Cullen Castle. It was a key fortress in the south of the Kingdom of Algiers. There, the Imperial army tried to scale the walls but was repelled with stones and arrows. The commander orders a retreat as the sun was already setting. At the Imperial camp, the atmosphere was festive. Merchants sold drinks and food to the soldiers who celebrated. Gaia and Atos arrive at the camp, and the boy finds the atmosphere strange, completely different from Pyros. Atos explains that it is common for merchants to gather around the army to do business. Gaia then understands, since the war in Pyros ended quickly, they didn't have time to gather there. But Atos still found the situation strange. He then tells him to go to the main camp to report their arrival. They approach the gate, guarded by 2 guards, and as always, the guards despise them, saying that the fight in Pyros must have been easy for them to arrive so quickly. Gaia, ignoring the provocation, says they would like to greet the commanding officer. Thus, the guard tells them to follow him. As they walk through the camp, Gaia feels something is wrong. It's not just the festive atmosphere, something very strange was happening. That's when the guard stops in front of a tent and warns them to be careful what they say. Upon entering, Gaia smells a strong scent of flowers and perfume, and finds himself faced with a bizarre scene. The prince surrounded by women. Instead of planning the battle, the women comment on the young soldier, and one of them introduces him to the prince, saying he has visitors. The prince asks who they are. Gaia instantly recognizes him. It was the same bastard who kicked him in the face last time. Atos introduces himself, saying they are the barbarian mercenaries from Pyros, and they came to pay their respects to the prince. But Muno, without even looking at them, throws his goblet at Atos' head. Gaia shouts, concerned, but his uncle stops him from reacting. The prince complains about the nuisance the barbarians are. He says he is resting and doesn't want to be bothered with useless reports. He even complains about his general, saying that reinforcements from mere barbarians are unnecessary. Thus, he orders the filthy barbarians to be thrown out. Atos holds back Gaia, who was about to explode. He says they have already paid their respects and it is best to leave. Once outside, he asks a soldier where his mercenary unit should position itself. The soldier, confused, tells him to find any vacant spot and set up camp. Gaia is shocked by the lack of organization. The soldier explains that there is no rush, as Kalin Castle is already surrounded. To him, it's just a matter of time until the kingdom's soldiers surrender. Atos observes the castle and notices a ship leaving. He wonders why they would be sending a ship out at that time. The soldier, surprised, says he was not informed of anything and that Atos must be seeing a mirage. Atos insists, but the soldier dismisses the idea, saying that not even merchant ships would leave at night without lights. Suspicious, Gaia and Atos exchange glances. Our boy comments that, although he's no expert, that place seems too relaxed for a battlefield. He wonders if the prince, despite seeming like a fool, is actually a strategic genius, but he soon dismisses the idea. Frustrated, he remembers that even though he doesn't want to obey, this is work and he needs to endure it. Atos turns to Gaia and asks if he noticed a ship when they were arriving. The boy is confused. He says he thought he saw something but wasn't sure. Gaia admits he didn't notice either, but thinks maybe his smartphone registered it. That's when Atos calls him again and says that the Imperial army might lose the battle at Kolon Castle, which leaves Gaia completely shocked. He asks why his uncle thinks that. Suddenly, chaos erupts. The army of the Kingdom of Algius attacks the camp. Atos yells at Gaia, telling him they will retreat as planned. Going back a few days earlier, Gaia and his friends were strolling through the camp market. Rosso, marveling, said the place looked like a festival. Gaia explains that with about 20,000 soldiers, the camp is a goldmine for merchants. Jessica, however, notices that the presence of so many merchants means the war is dragging on. To her, that was no cause for celebration. But Rosso didn't care. As long as he could eat well, he was happy. He complains that everyone is too relaxed and the battlefield is boring. Atos and other warriors agree, saying they were sent as reinforcements but have just been standing around waiting for orders. Rosso says he prefers walking around the market with Gaia to doing nothing, but our boy reminds him that they are there to restock supplies. He then asks Jessica why she came, since she didn't seem interested in the market, and teases her, saying she wanted to spend time with Gaia. The elf becomes completely flustered and denies any relationship with him. Gaia, ignoring the joke, says they are not there to have fun. As they walk, they notice that the merchants wear different clothes. Jessica concludes they are not from the Empire, and Gaia agrees, explaining that since security is loose, there is a mix of people and goods from all over. That's when Rosso calls him, excited, to see a fruit stall. Jessica is amazed by the colors, while Gaia explains they are a type of edible nut. Rosso, who had never seen anything like it, is fascinated. The merchant welcomes them, offering fresh oranges from the south. He then cuts one for them to try. That's when Gaia asks if they are merchants from the Kingdom of Algius. The man is surprised, but Gaia explains that although he has an imperial accent, the woman next to him has a kingdom accent. The merchant laughs, impressed by the boy's perception. He introduces himself as Kuranos and confirms he is from the Kingdom of Algius, but explains that for merchants there is no empire or kingdom, and where they can trade is where they live. He asks them not to worry, assuring them he had imperial permits. Upon tasting the fruit, Rosso and Jessica are amazed by the flavor. The merchant, seeing the reaction, also offers a piece of watermelon. They try it and love it, and Keranos, satisfied, asks if they enjoyed it. He then comments that oranges and watermelons last a long time and would probably withstand the journey to the barbarian settlement. Gaia tenses up upon hearing that word again, and confronts him, asking why the hell he thinks they are barbarians. Karnos, with a smile, explains that seeing an elf and a giant lizard together, he deduced they were from the northern mercenary group that had just arrived. Gaia, impressed, compliments Keranos' sharp wit. The merchant then asks if they came to buy rations, saying he also has fresh ingredients. But Gaia asks for something lighter and more durable, and in sufficient quantity for his entire mercenary unit. Kuranos says it is possible, but soon realizes that for someone who just arrived, Gaia seems to be planning to leave soon. Our boy smiles, saying he is just cautious and doesn't like to be without supplies. Kuranos apologizes for the indiscretion, and says that since it is a large quantity, he will call them when everything is ready. Already far from there, Gaia points to the smiling man, and Rosso adds, saying his movements are trained like a fighter's, which is rare for a merchant. That's when Gaia confirms the suspicion. That man is not a merchant. Using his smartphone, he reveals the truth. He is a soldier, probably a spy from the army of Algius. Upon hearing this, his friends are shocked. Gaia admits he was startled by how he guessed they were barbarians without them even introducing themselves. Jessica, shocked, asks if he is serious about the spy and the possible defeat of the Empire. Back to the present, Gaia asks his uncle again why he thinks the Imperial army might lose. Atos explains that if he wasn't mistaken, a ship was heading towards Kolon Castle. He thought it might be from the Imperial army, but the soldier they talked to didn't know anything. Gaia tries to understand the situation, and then suggests that the ship might be a supply ship from the Kingdom of Algius. Atos agrees, explaining that with supplies they can maintain their forces. And most importantly, if supplies are being delivered, it means that information about the castle's situation is also reaching the Kingdom of Algius. Eventually, reinforcements will come, and soldiers who know that help is on the way are stubborn. The Imperial army will not be able to take Kolon Castle. Gaia then remembers the ship his uncle mentioned, happened, and how Keranos, the supposed spy, offered to prepare their supplies. He concludes that if the kingdom of Algiers has already secured a transport route to the castle, the reinforcements won't take long to arrive. Gaia says that's why they need to prepare to retreat, as he doesn't believe the Imperial army will take care of them in a retreating battle. Rosso asks if the Imperial army realized the danger, but Gaia thinks not. Jessica, annoyed, asks if they shouldn't warn them, and Rosso agrees, saying that technically they are their employers, but Gaia doubts they would listen to what mere barbarians have to say. Rosso insists that it's not about whether they care or not. To him, as hired mercenaries, they have a duty to act correctly. It's a matter of honor. Gaia understands his point of view. They try to warn one of the officers, but the man refuses to believe that the Imperial army could lose. He boasts about the difference in forces and says that if they continue the siege, victory is guaranteed. Rosso explains that the problem is that they haven't cut the supply lines. The officer retorts that 1 or 2 ships would not be enough to supply the castle. That's when a soldier appears, yelling that Prince Mono is calling. The officer, annoyed, says he has given his warning and can't do anything more, as the supreme commander is the prince, who only wants to hear about victories. As he walks away, he grumbles about the barbarians and their absurd ideas. He tries to convince himself that defeat is impossible, but the doubt has already been planted. Impatient as ever, the prince yells, and his men rush to attend to him, afraid of his fury. Back at the market, Atos and Karnos close the deal. The payment will be in silver coins and the horses they received. Gaia explains that horses are expensive to maintain, and Keranos agrees to buy them at a fair price. Instead of the horses, they take some mountain donkeys, which are more resistant and can travel on precarious roads. Gaia and Keranos exchange a smile, wondering if they will have a chance to use such roads. Keranos then announces that he is closing the shop as he ran out of goods and plans to leave the next day. In his thoughts, he confirms that his espionage mission is over and that the kingdom's reinforcements should arrive in a few days. Gaia says goodbye, wishing him a good journey. He then reflects on the kingdom of Algiers, a great eastern power with a long rivalry against the empire. Keranos reveals that they are currently very economically dependent on the empire, and that it would be great to have relations with a force like theirs. He says he finds Gaia's group very interesting as business partners and hopes they can meet again after the battle. Thus, the two shake hands, and Keranos invites Gaia to visit them someday. Back at the camp, Atos meets with the other leaders. He says he is happy that all the tribes have accepted his suggestions and asks everyone to pay attention to the situation on the battlefield. One of the warriors expresses his discomfort, finding it strange to plan a retreat after having already received the advance payment. But Gaia cuts him off, saying that their duty has already been fulfilled. Whether the Empire listens to the advice or not is their problem. He explains that if their concerns prove unnecessary, great, but if not, they will not bear the consequences of the Empire's losses. His only job now was to ensure that the barbarian mercenary unit returned home safely. Meanwhile, the Crown Prince was informed that his troops had arrived. This imposing figure is the commander of that battlefront, and clearly a high-ranking noble of the Empire. The battlefield stretched across a vast plain. Meanwhile, on top of one of the walls, a soldier yawned and complained that he'd had way too much to drink the night before, but his buddy quickly snapped at him to shut up. The other guy defended himself, blaming a woman who kept pouring him drinks, when suddenly one of the guards called out to them. Confused, the guard asked what that thing was off in the distance. Out on the horizon, a cloud of dust was rising up. One of them confirmed that something was out there, and there were a lot of them. Soon enough, the silhouette of a massive army came into focus. The guards started panicking, wondering if it was reinforcements. And without a second thought, one of them screamed at the top of his lungs that the camp was under enemy attack. One of the officers tried to calm the troops down, but he was told that the army of the Kingdom of Algiers was advancing from the north, and they'd be surrounded any minute. Ignoring the danger, he ordered his troops to pull back from the castle and meet the enemy head-on. One of the soldiers tried to push back, but he got cut off by another piece of terrifying news. The Algiers Navy was also closing in by sea, locking them into a pincer attack. Panicking, he ordered them to inform the prince and wait for his orders. One of his men asked if they should run, and Gaia, using his smartphone, confirmed that the enemy was coming by land and sea. He studied the map and saw that by the numbers, the Empire wasn't actually losing yet, and there might still be a chance to break the encirclement. Despite his hatred for the Empire, he didn't want to see a pointless massacre. So he warned everyone to get ready to fall back, and said he was going to alert headquarters, which is when he found out that the one leading the attack was none other than Crown Prince Alex. Meanwhile, Prince Alex declared that the people of Kolan would not wait any longer. With a confident smile, he gave the order to launch the attack, telling his men to crush those Imperial cowards. Back at the Imperial camp, an officer informed Prince Mono that the northern detachment was under attack, and that the Algiers troops were marching out from the castle. Furious, Muno hurled his goblet across the room and yelled, asking if his men were useless and incapable of doing anything without his orders. Gaia, who had just arrived, couldn't believe what he was seeing, wondering how the prince could be sitting there drinking at a moment like this. One of the advisors tried to argue, but Muno called him an idiot, saying he was the one who'd ordered them to always wait for his permission. He bragged that his father's troops wouldn't go down that easily, and that the real problem was his general's lousy tactics. With nothing but contempt, he sent them back to their posts and told them not to bother him anymore. The officer, desperate, tried to tell him that at this rate they'd be wiped out. That's when Gaia stepped forward and said the prince should order a retreat. The second he heard that, Muno lost it, calling him a fool and saying retreating was a pathetic move. But Gaia pushed back, explaining that the enemy was moving fast and that if they missed this window, even a retreat would become impossible. The prince, completely wasted, shot back that there was no way the Algius army had more men than they did. His advisor agreed but mentioned that the crown prince of Algius was a brilliant general. That's when Gaia revealed the truth. That very crown prince, Alex, was leading the attack himself. The news spread like wildfire, and everyone realized that against the Silver Lion, the undefeated prince, they wouldn't stand much of a chance. His men remembered the rumors about how he'd conquered entire kingdoms in a matter of days, and panic spread through the camp. Gaia, hearing all this, figured his enemy really was someone famous. The advisor, desperate, warned the prince that Alex was a dangerous opponent and that he should reconsider the retreat. But Muno, furious, grabbed him and shouted that this was ridiculous. Terrified, the prince admitted that if they retreated, his father would definitely blame him for it. That's when the advisor had an idea. Instead of a retreat, they would call it a tactical repositioning, to regroup the troops, which the other soldiers were on board with. He explained that a repositioning was different from a cowardly retreat and that the emperor would surely understand. Muno, convinced, agreed, saying that as the pillar of the army, it only made sense for him to be the first to move to a safe position. And so, he gave the order. The entire army was to reposition from Colin Castle. The advisor, relieved, ordered them to notify the front line, explaining that they'd consolidate and head toward Pyros. Watching all this, Gaia and Atos let out a long sigh. They both agreed the situation was awful, way worse than they'd thought. The Empire's retreat was going to be brutal, since they'd be hit from the sea too. The best they could hope for was getting out alive. Atos told Gaia they could now pull back along the planned route, but they got interrupted by the prince's advisor. The poor guy said he had something to discuss with them, and that it wasn't a bad deal for either side. Meanwhile, on the battlefield, Prince Alex pressed forward. He urged his soldiers to push deeper and deeper, saying the recapture of Colon was within reach. With renewed morale, his men charged ahead, shouting for Prince Alex and for their fellow countrymen. One of his guards warned him about the danger and asked him to fall back, but Alex explained that he'd just come to rally the troops and would be heading back soon. He thought to himself that, just like Koronos had said, the battle was going their way. The Imperial army had no chain of command, and victory was all but guaranteed. Alex said he had no intention of becoming a war-crazed maniac like the enemy emperor, and then revealed his plan. Since the enemy commander was the incompetent prince, he intended to capture him alive to use as a bargaining chip in negotiations. Suddenly, a soldier rode up and reported that the enemy army was on the move, concentrating its forces on the main road in what was clearly an attempt to retreat. Alex, with a grin, concluded that they weren't complete idiots after all. He then announced that he was going after them personally to see what the Empire's crown prince was really made of, ignoring his men's protests. All of a sudden, a strange dark energy filled the battlefield. Gaia shouted orders to the elf chief, and just like that, black flames tore an opening through the enemy soldiers. The Empire's men, panicking, wondered how the battle had turned into such a mess, but Gaia ignored them and yelled at them to push through the opening. He told them to quit whining, saying their tears weren't going to save the prince, and the soldiers, even though they didn't like it, decided to follow him. Even Prince Muno, who shot down any idea that didn't come from him, got on board with the plan. And his number one motivator for it couldn't have been anything other than money. Going back a bit in time, the advisor realized that the plan was to secretly evacuate the crown prince with the barbarian mercenaries. Gaia, watching the man freak out, asked if he was really supposed to be a commander. The advisor, calmer now, replied that at this point, that didn't matter anymore. He explained that without the prince's bizarre orders, they might actually do better making their own decisions. He then connected the dots. If Gaia's warning was right, the enemy already knew the prince was on the battlefield, and naturally, he'd be the number one target. Atos explained that since the barbarians were different from Imperial soldiers, they were the perfect cover to hide the prince's presence. The advisor, determined, declared that his only mission was to get the prince home alive. Back in the present, one of Gaia's men asked if they could keep advancing, but he, looking at the map, realized that the Empire's escape plan had already been figured out by the enemy. He studied the map and noticed that Alex's forces were also moving toward the road at an impressive speed, which confirmed the rumors about his command skills. Despite the enemy's brilliance, Gaia realized that this development wasn't all bad for them. If the kingdom's army concentrated its forces in one spot, the encirclement would weaken everywhere else, creating the perfect opening for his group to slip away. With that in mind, he ordered everyone to break through the encirclement and head for the forest. The plan was simple. Over the past few days, they had already split up to transport supplies. As barbarians, they were used to marching through rough terrain, and in the mountains they could shake off any pursuers. As they pushed forward, all he could hope was that they'd hold out long enough to break through the siege. Suddenly, he stopped when he noticed something on his map, an enemy unit with a suspiciously large number of soldiers. With that, Gaia screamed at everyone to run as fast as they could. And when he looked over, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. Prince Alex himself, leading the cavalry, which made him wonder why the hell the Supreme Commander would be on the front line. One of Alex's men asked if they should go around the group of Imperial soldiers, but the prince with a smile ordered them to charge straight ahead. And so, the cavalry tore through without mercy, trampling anyone in their path. In the chaos, Atos warned Gaia that the prince's group was getting cut off. Right away, our boy said he'd go help them and told his uncle to gather everyone and run, because this was an enemy they couldn't beat. Atos tried to stop him, saying it was way too dangerous to go alone, but Gaia promised he'd grab the deadweight and be right back. In his head, he admitted he'd messed up. If Prince Muno died there, all their efforts would have been for nothing. Meanwhile, the prince, panicking, was screaming at his men to defend him, but of course they were all already at their breaking point. Alex spotted them right away and noticed their unusual gear, which made him realize they weren't Imperial soldiers. Without hesitating, he charged straight at Prince Muno, but Gaia threw himself in the way, blocking the strike. And Alex, surprised, wondered if they were a tribal unit from the Empire's north. Gaia yelled at them not to just stand there and to fall back while Alex's strength kept knocking him further and further back. Gaia quickly realized that at this rate they'd get left behind, and he wondered whether, even with healing, they'd survive having their necks cut clean off. Suddenly, a burst of magic exploded between them. Seeing his chance, Gaia yelled for everyone to hurry. Jessica yanked him along, scolding him for being so reckless and charging in alone, and reminded him that he was the chief. Rosso then grabbed Prince Muno and asked Gaia if they should bring him along. While Alex's men rushed to protect him, the elves threw up a magic barrier, and Gaia shouted at everyone to move while they still had the chance. And just like that, the two leaders shared one last look. Jessica yelled at him to hurry up, and he picked up the pace. One of Alex's men asked if they should chase after them, but he decided against it. He explained that since they had mages, he didn't want to risk unnecessary casualties. The prince then ordered his troops to reform their lines and advance again. His man, worried, asked if he still planned to keep going, saying it would be safer if he pulled back. But Alex brushed off the warning and remembered the name Karanos had used to describe them, the Barbarian Mercenary Corps. Now in the forest sometime later, Gaia looked over the map on his smartphone. The situation was clear. They were completely surrounded by Algia's troops. Grumbling about the ambushes, he couldn't help laughing like a madman. If it weren't for the smartphone, they would have been caught already. Even though the patrols were small and easy to avoid, it meant the enemy had known from the start that they'd try to escape through the forest. He muttered that all this effort to hunt down a single mercenary unit was way overkill. He admitted he couldn't take it anymore. Meanwhile, Prince Muno was throwing a fit, complaining about his dirty feet and demanding a carriage in the middle of the forest. He then grabbed one of his men and, since a carriage was out of the question, demanded to be carried on his back. The poor guy, not knowing what to do, started stammering. So Ados suggested they take a break right there, and Gaia agreed. The retreat from Kalan Castle ended in a crushing defeat for the Empire. Less than half of the soldiers made it out alive, a disastrous loss. Back at camp, one of the men commented that most of the dead had come from noble imperial families. He admitted he had his own mixed feelings about that, but for Gaia the situation wasn't all bad. Now they could call in the favor they'd done for the Empire. Ados agreed, and Gaia, fired up, said they'd make sure to charge a nice premium on top. That's when the prince's advisor walked over. Gaia, with a mocking tone, asked what Lord Useless wanted now. The advisor, with an awkward smile, explained that he wanted to ask for help improving the meals, because according to him, His Useless Highness was complaining about the food, saying he was sick of biscuits and dried meat, and that without hot soup it wasn't a meal fit for a human being. On top of that, he was demanding sweets, wine, and fruit juice. Gaia, rubbing his forehead, tried to keep his cool. He explained that they were fugitives, which is why they were avoiding the main roads, and if they lit a campfire, the smoke would give away their position. On top of that, he pointed out that the rations they were sharing didn't include any luxury items. But the advisor pushed back, telling Gaia he had to understand that the prince wasn't someone you could reason with. Well, Gaia was speechless. Tired of arguing, he said to just give the prince the oranges and watermelons from their supplies. But the advisor pressed on, asking about the hot soup. Gaia, out of patience, told them they just have to make do with that for now. The advisor, disappointed, made a comment about the lack of a proper meal. Gaia then called over to his uncle and asked with a dark look in his eye if they were really milking the prince for everything he was worth, to which Atos confirmed that yes, they were. And so, they continued the journey through the forest. Hours later, one of them shouted, relieved that they were out of the forest and had reached the road. And in the distance, they spotted the city of Pyros. The Empire's banners were still flying. The advisor and his men celebrated, relieved to see that Pyros was still under Imperial control and that Imperial troops were stationed there. Inside the palace, a man expressed his joy at the prince's safe return. He said he'd heard about the battle at Kolan and was amazed he'd survived such a brutal fight. But the prince just complained, saying the soldiers had been useless and incompetent. He then turned to the man Hibitius and asked if he hadn't sent nothing but fools to serve him. But Hibitius, nervous, denied it up and down. But the prince said it had been horrible having to travel alongside them. However, Hibitius mentioned that he'd heard the Barbarian Mercenary Corps had helped save him. But of course, the prince threw another tantrum. He went on, saying those savages knew nothing about civilization and hadn't even given him a hot meal. Exhausted, he demanded that Hibitius treat him with the utmost hospitality. With that, Hibitius promised he'd do his very best. Outside at the harbor, a ship was getting ready to set sail. The Crown Prince's group had already shipped out for the imperial capital, and Ados commented that they were finally rid of that pain in the neck. Rosso reminded him that he and Ados would still have to deal with the Empire later down the line, and Gaia, with an awkward smile, agreed. He admitted that the real headache was going to start once they reached the capital, but that he'd rather think about that when the time came. Suddenly, a man called out to them. The man asked if they were planning to board the ship, and Gaia confirmed they were and asked what the issue was. That's when the man smiled and offered them a job to make some extra cash during the voyage. Once on board the ship, the man explained that, a few days back, a ship full of bid shots had left port and taken most of the crew with it, which left them short-handed for the heavy lifting. Ados quickly caught on. They were filling the open spots with passengers. The man confirmed it. Jessica and Rosso had no problem with hauling cargo. They mentioned that, on top of that, the crew had promised to upgrade the meals, which was already a pretty solid incentive. Gaia wondered if the food on the march had really been that bad. All of a sudden, he stopped when he saw a group of people in chains, and Atos explained they were slaves, probably bought by the merchant ship. While they were working, one of the crew members shouted at one of them to stop standing around and get back to work. That's when a man approached and asked if they were with the Barbarian mercenary group. He recognized Gaia's accent and confirmed that he was from the Bluemont tribe. Suddenly, one of the crewmen started beating the man. Gaia tried to step in, but he got shoved back. That's when the crewman shouted that he could treat the slaves however he wanted. But our boy wasn't having it, and he ended up telling his friends later that he gave the jerk a serious beating. But Rosso reassured him, saying the bastard had it coming and that if Gaia hadn't snapped, he would have done it himself. Gaia then looked down into the ship's hold and called out to his uncle. That's when Atos explained that this man had lost the war and become property of the Empire. When you lose to the Empire, you become something they can buy and sell. And he explained that there were plenty of other slaves like him on that ship. Gaia asked if they couldn't just buy them back, but Atos reminded him that they were barely getting back on their feet themselves and didn't have the money or the freedom to do that. Once you become a slave, there's no changing it.